Hello, everyone. It's I, the Grouchy Historian, once again, here for week 5 of the second quarter of our American Constitution. Okay, this week we wrap up the Federalist Papers, okay, with another set, again, chosen because they are the Federalist Papers most often cited in Supreme Court decision. And this week, we will also read Anti-Federalist number 1. As we mentioned last week, along with the 85 Federalist Papers that were written in support of the Constitution, there were also 85 Anti-Federalist Papers explaining why we shouldn't have this new Constitution and we should continue on with the government arrangements set up by the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so this week, we're going to talk a lot about taxation, right? Make no mistake about it. Our founders were very concerned about the right of taxation. I believe the quote was the right to tax. I'm sorry, the power to tax is the power to destroy. Very smart people, our founding fathers, right? So, because of course, they had just fought a war with Great Britain pretty much over the issue of taxation and representation. So, there is a great deal of discussion throughout the Federalist Papers about the power to tax. Who can tax what on whom and what, right? Everything. So the question, of course, in particular that is argued through many of the Federalist Papers is the power of the new federal government versus the power of the states to tax. And as most of us experience, guess what? You get to pay both of them, right? So, and of course, there were other issues at work. I think, as we had mentioned in the first part of this quarter, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton had wanted a very strong federal government with very strong specific powers to tax and raise armies, support armies, fund armies because of their experience of the Revolutionary War, right? So it all sort of wraps together, right? The power to tax, the power to raise armies, the power to wage war, the power to do foreign policy. All of these are going to be topics of the Federalist Papers this week, as you can see. Obviously, they were most concerned about the Benjamins, business and economics, right? Again, remember, these guys were wealthy and they were very concerned about protecting their wealth. Funny how that works. So they were very concerned about making sure that the business of government became business. Okay. But they were also very concerned about foreign wars, foreign entanglements, foreign policy, right? Again, they had just fought a war with Great Britain that they had drawn most of the European powers into, France, Spain, the Netherlands. But of course, they're also very leery of getting dragged into the nearly interminable wars fought in Europe. And of course, as we're going to see from a historical point of view, almost as soon as the Constitution is ratified, and almost as soon as George Washington takes office as the first president, Europe starts what will become the Napoleonic Wars that will waged from 1792 until 1850. Over 20 years of war, of nearly constant warfare in Europe that the United States was very eager to stay out of and not get involved with. So, but they did want to have the power to protect American commerce overseas. So, of course, one of the first things that they make sure they understand is that the new government has the power to defend piracy. Interesting, ironic question. The first people that the United States went to war with was not Great Britain, was not France, was not Germany. It was basically the 19th century equivalent of Muslim terrorism. That is the Barbary pirates. Okay, a little fun fact there. Yes, the United States has basically been fighting Islamic terrorists on and off since about the year 1795. For my jarhead friends, the shores of Tripoli. Yeah, that was the Barbary Wars. If you've never really studied them, you should. America's first war, right? Barbary pirates. This was a very big deal with the government. Okay, so As we also mentioned last week, the big major complaint of the Anti-Federalists was the Bill of Rights. And as we mentioned last week, and we'll see this week, that in order to get the Constitution ratified by several of the states, they basically had to make a deal. Come on, we'll make you a deal. That as soon as the Constitution was ratified, they would immediately amend it with an articulated Bill of Rights, which they did. Okay. Also, interestingly, there was also a concern about how representative the new government would be, right? As originally written, the Constitution, I believe, I'd have to go back and do my research, that it was one representative for about every 40,000 people. This was jiggered a bit, and I believe it came to one representative for about every 30,000 people. Now, there was still a lot of debate about that was too many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly there had to be a balance between how many representatives you had versus the population, because they only expected the population to continue to grow. So then you've got the problem of, well, how big does your House of Representatives get until it's a little bit unwieldy, right? Because as we can see today, we have a nation of somewhere around 300 million Americans, and we have 435 representatives and 100 senators, right? Which is probably not a lot, but by golly, we certainly don't need any more of those critters in Congress. So 435 is the count. Okay. The other thing they discussed, and it's a particular topic of Federalist 81, is the power of the courts. This became a more interesting debate as we got further into the Federalist Papers, because significant concerns were raised about how much power this new court would have. Again, remember, the Constitution of all the branches of government was the most vague about the court system. It basically said there would be a Supreme Court of an indeterminate number of judges, and then such other federal courts as Congress may deem to create. So it was very fluid. But of course, the question is, what is the balance of power, right? Because the founders were very big on checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judicial branch, is what is the balance of power between the judicial branch and the legislative branch, in particular, the ability of the court to override the legislature. Here's an interesting quote from Federalist 81. Quote, "The power of construing the laws according to the spirit of the Constitution will enable the court to mold them into whatever shape it may think proper, especially as its decisions will not be in any manner subject to the revision or correction of the legislative body. This is as unprecedented as it is dangerous." That's a fascinating quote, because I believe Madison wrote Federalist 81. It says, no, the courts aren't going to do that. They're not going to override the legislature. We're going to see how that plays out next quarter when we start looking at the Supreme Court cases. What we will indeed find is that today, the Supreme Court often will override acts of the legislature by deeming them unconstitutional. This was an evolving thing. We're going to talk about this some more in the third quarter. So as you read through the papers for this week, the paper topic I picked was, not unsurprisingly, we're going to do a little comparison exercise between Federalist number 1 from last week and Anti-Federalist number 1 from this week. Because what I want you to do is look at, with the hindsight of history, right? Because now we have 200 years of experience of using this here Constitution. Which one of them do you think was more convincing? There you go, right? Because history is a harsh teacher, right? So who do you think had the more real concerns or positive things to say about the Constitution? I'm sure your instructors will be interested to hear what you have to say. All right, next week, we're going to wrap up with the Bill of Rights, and then we're going to move in to Supreme Court cases.